Hey everybody, what's up? I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. I got a good book for you here. It's by this man, The Dynasty, Jeff Benedict. For anyone all about the New England Patriots. Jeff, how are you?
Great. It's great to be here.
So Jeff, a lot has been written about the New England Patriots, and one of the things I love about your work and your writing is that you balloon into a situation where stuff has been written, stuff has been said, you discover new stuff about these people and the team. What was it like putting this thing together?
Exhausting. I don't think I've ever worked harder on a book than I have on this one. But the perspective that I brought was that I've never written about this team. I've never covered the Patriots. I'm not a football writer per se. And so I came into it with, just a clean slate in the sense that I didn't really have any preconceived notions other than the fact that I knew I was going to be writing about the best sports franchise we've seen in this century, I think, from any sport. And that's what I was most interested in really going into it was how did they build this winning machine? And then how did they sustain it for so long? And those were really the two central questions I had at the beginning.
I've certainly learned a lot about Robert Kraft's story in this and knew some about Belichick and Brady. What blew you away the most in terms of just discovering the crazy backstory that was with the Patriots being the laughing stock of the league to becoming the greatest dynasty in the sport?
Well, one of the things I was interested in from the very beginning, when I was thinking about doing the book, there's so much known about Belichick and Brady in terms of what they've accomplished on the field together. To me, where the virgin territory was the backstory and in terms of how did the Patriots become a dynasty. And I think that really does go back to this odyssey that Robert Kraft went on, really starting way back in 1971 when he became a season ticket holder. And the Patriots were essentially a brand new franchise, and they were also a terrible franchise. And he gets it in his mind that he'd like to one day own the team. And his perspective is really from the standpoint of a fan who sits in the stand with his kids every Sunday, like so many other thousands of people around him. And I think that once he gets to the point where he sees a path to acquire the team, it's such a circuitous route that he has to take, acquiring parking lots, then getting the stadium out of bankruptcy, and then becoming the landlord of the team. As I describe it, essentially owning the owner at the time, Victor Kiam. All of these things, you see this sort of determination that he has that it's a foreshadowing really of how this organization will behave later as a winning organization. He was exhibiting a lot of those qualities early on when he was just trying to acquire the team. I thought that story was really important because it sets the stage for so many things that would come later.
I mean, the whole part about Hartford and what was going on with the soil, I mean, that's like next level stuff that we found out there. I mean, what blew you away about just the fact that the Patriots probably should have been in Hartford and then never left Massachusetts?
I mean, to me, every one of these chapters, I had a mandate from my editor, which was I want to learn something new on every page of this book. So it's a 600-page book, that's a long book. And Patriots are some of the most well-informed, fanatical fans in sports. So I thought that's kind of an overwhelming mandate from an editor. And so I went looking in places that I just thought hadn't really been examined very much before. The possibility of going to Connecticut is a great story. I live in Connecticut, so I was fascinated in the elements of that story anyways. The idea out there had always been that, well, Kraft was never serious about coming here in the first place. It was just, a diversion to get better leverage in Massachusetts. I think nothing could be further from the truth. And when you get into what actually was happening at the time, you realize not only how close they were to coming here, but also how much more lucrative it would have been for the Kraft family and the Patriots organization to have come to Connecticut. There was way more money on the table here in Connecticut and way less risk. And so why didn't they do that? And so I spent a chapter in Connecticut because it's another thing that shows you why these guys are different. I thought the interactions with Governor Rowland and the politicians in Connecticut were fascinating. Some of the best drama, really, in the early stages.
There's certainly a lot of drama in the early stages. And when I think of drama with the Patriots, I think about Bill Belichick, Bill Parcells, the Jets, the Patriots. What was some of the new stuff you discovered there? Because Bill Parcells comes across looking pretty interesting in your book in terms of everything that we find out with him and the Jets and the Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, Parcells is a great character. You know, he's larger than life. From a writing standpoint, you can't ask for better characters than guys like Bill Parcells. And he plays a very important and pivotal role in the early stages of this franchise. Once Kraft gets the team, he inherits Bill Parcells, who at the time was considered probably the best coach in the NFL. And he takes two different franchises to the Super Bowl. And he's got this huge personality. And Bill Parcells sort of represents the old NFL, the old guard. The Kraft family is the new guard. I mean, they're young, they're new to the league. They come in right as free agency and a salary cap are being introduced into the National Football League. Those were new things to Parcells. And Kraft is looking at a guy, an assistant coach, Bill Belichick at the time, who also represented the new direction of the NFL. He had a mastery of the salary cap. He knew how to deal with free agency. He had a vision for where he wanted to go as a head coach. And so there's all these things coming together. And I think the tension between Parcells and Kraft is, you know, it's the stuff of Hollywood, of a Hollywood film. And so I really do delve into that and trying to understand the dynamic of that relationship and also the role that Will McDonough, the Boston Globe writer, plays. He's a central character in those chapters because of his close friendship, both with Kraft and with Parcells. And he's sort of on both sides of the fence. On one hand, he's a journalist, but he's a guy who makes a living with these relationships and connections that he has. And so it gets to be this kind of drama that's playing out that almost overwhelms the football games.
Tom Brady certainly plays a factor in all that as well. And you go back to his days in California, how he got to Michigan, even getting drafted, the Patriots quarterback coach who passes away, who's super high on him. Belichick's watching the tape. What pops the most about the Tom Brady story, especially as he first makes his way to New England?
Well, I don't know if I could point to one thing. I'd say character-wise about Brady is that, to me, I'm really interested as an author, just as a storyteller. When possible, it's always good with an audience to do some foreshadowing. You don't want to give things away later in the story, but when possible, when appropriate, you want to foreshadow things. I think the backstory of Tom Brady and how he gets to New England, we all know sort of what the elements of that are. But here you get to see really the formation of this Everest-sized chip start forming on his shoulder. And it's going to get bigger and bigger. And that becomes part of his competitive drive. And then I think also when you think about, this is a big story. It spans 25 years. The dynasty is a quarter of a century long. So when you're writing that, you can't spend a lot of time on each year of that process. But I specifically chose to dedicate 4 chapters in this book to the 2001 season, because to me, that's the watershed year for this franchise. It's really the year that the dynasty comes to full fruition. And it's one of the things that's so pivotal in that year is Drew Bledsoe's injury. And so I opened the book there in the hospital room where he is basically undergoing a procedure. And when he wakes up, he sees the 3 men standing over his bed, the coach, the owner, the quarterback. No one would imagine at that point that he would be looking at the nucleus of the greatest dynasty in football history. But when you get to 2001, when Brady steps in, initially this is not a hard decision for Belichick because Bledsoe's out. So you put in the next guy. When it becomes critical is when Bledsoe's cleared to play medically, and he should have been put back in the lineup. If conventional wisdom had been followed, he's got a $100 million contract. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's clearly the greatest quarterback the Patriots have ever had. He should get his job back. At least that's what you think. I think here's where you see the guts and the conviction of a young head coach, Bill Belichick, who sticks with Brady. And you also see Kraft's decision not to intervene, despite the fact that Bledsoe wants him to. Naturally, he wants him to. Who wouldn't want him to? But the fact is that Kraft, he wanted to, but he was disciplined enough not to. And by allowing Belichick to stick with the young guy, he stakes his career on Brady. Brady, at the same time, really hitches his wagon to Belichick because he knows if he performs well, he is going to be the quarterback of the future. So that season, there's a series of things that happened between the three guys that I thought really set the stage for all of the winning that was to follow. And so that's why I spent so much more time in the 0-1 season.
Even
I mean, there's
there's
that moment, right, where on the day of the Raiders game, which is the snow game, which is known for the tuck rule controversial call. But what I loved about that game was a moment that really had never been reported much on, which was Brady was almost late to the stadium that day because of the snowstorm. And so it's an opportunity for me as a writer to do something that's sort of metaphorical, which is here he is. He's the young kind of rookie. He doesn't want to be late because Belichick's a drill sergeant and he wants guys there 3 hours before game. And he leaves his house early like he always does. And then he gets to almost to the stadium and he hits this huge traffic jam and it's snowing. And he realizes he's not going to make it in time. What do you do? And it's a great opportunity to say, this is how Tom Brady solves problems. Because football games are all about solving problems, reacting to things. And Brady picks up the phone and calls head of security, who's a brand new guy who used to be a state trooper. And this is like his moment to save the day, right? And suddenly the state trooper goes into action. He calls the barracks and they got a trooper coming down there, breaking through the traffic. He finds Brady in his yellow Jeep, turns on his lights and basically says, follow me. And Brady gets behind him and all the traffic is parting and they're making their way to the stadium in the snow. And one by one, other players that were in the same jam, they see Brady following the trooper. And so they get behind Brady and follow Brady. By the time you get to the stadium, there's sort of a short line of players following Brady. And to me, this was a great example of the kind of leader that he was already becoming to the team. And so then you see what happens in that game. And so I was just looking for moments like that were anecdotal that could show a reader what was happening as opposed to me telling them what was happening.
That story is really emblematic of who Tom Brady became and what the Patriots would become for many years going forward. And, you know, Jeff, when you read your book, you see these three guys so closely aligned and so tight. But then obviously we realize what happened in terms of how things unraveled the final few years. As you went through the story, when did you realize there were some issues here and that potentially this thing could end with Brady on Tampa Bay?
Well, actually, so my perspective of all this is that things didn't unravel. The way I would look at it is say, it is absolutely extraordinary and unprecedented that a partnership of a quarterback and a coach could last for 20 years. In other words, we can't look back in history and say, well, they did that and they did that and they did that. Montana and Walsh didn't do that. Bradshaw and Knoll didn't do that. Lombardi and Starr didn't do that. So what's extraordinary here isn't that it ended after 20 years, it's that it lasted 20 years. And I think we'd be kind of foolish if we didn't expect some tension during that 20 years, because 20 years it's just an eternity in professional football or in sports. And to be competing at the upper echelon of the league during that entire 20 years. What I find fascinating is that the way the tension was productive toward winning. In other words, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick are extraordinarily different human beings. The magic is that when Belichick puts on a headset and Brady puts on a helmet, there's a telepathy between them that doesn't exist anywhere else in the NFL. And I think their commitment to winning was exhibited every time they stepped on the field together. Robert Kraft's genius was realizing early on that he basically had the John Lennon and Paul McCartney of professional football and saying, hey, the Beatles only could stay together for 8 years because the two biggest stars couldn't exist on the same stage any longer. How do we keep these two guys on the same stage for 20 years? they did that. And I think the way it ended this year, again, was unusual because it didn't end with acrimony and finger pointing and name calling. It ended amicably. Not only publicly was it amicable, but privately, more importantly, privately, this was an amicable, respectful departure. And I think part of it is just, you're looking at two guys, and now I'm talking about Belichick and Brady, who just seem to not die in the sport. They just keep going, right? They have this endless determination to be excellent. And so they lasted 2 decades together. They left New England an incredible gift, and they changed the sport forever. To me, that's not a negative, right? That's a lot of amazing positive things.
A lot to be proud of there for sure.
Yeah.
The last time that we spoke, we talked about your Tiger Woods book, and with Tiger, there were stipulations to trying to talk to him and lawyers involved and stuff like that. Are there any unanswerable questions here you have when it comes to Brady, Belichick, or Kraft, or do you feel like you got everything answered that you wanted to in terms of your research and the people you talked to?
I mean, for what I was trying to do, I felt like I was able to go where I wanted to go. I actually, the term I would use for this project is, I felt more liberated than I've ever been as a writer. And part of that is because, I mean, Tiger Woods is a great, big, sort of sprawling American story in my mind, which is what was so exciting about it. But I thought the canvas here was actually just, it was so expansive. You're looking at this big, big canvas and going, where do I want to paint? Where do you want to go first? It was a wealth of riches. And so the problems were sort of things like, because there was so much material to work with, so much drama, so many championships, so many great moments, so many setbacks and massive losses. Like the Super Bowl losses to the Giants were so crushing that any other franchise, I think it would have just done them in. But this team comes back. And so the challenge for me was trying to figure out, like, where do you start? What is the beginning point of this? And then really figuring out on a timeline, what are the incredible or the important moments that have to be part of the Dynasty story? So there was obviously a lot of things I left on the cutting room floor. I tried to focus on the things that I thought were most essential. And even then, it still ended up being almost 600 pages.
We get a little bit of everything in this one. Jeff, thanks so much for jumping on, man. Be well, and we'll talk to you down the road, all right?
Thank you.